My name is Greg Horn, and you're listening to the Yuriwase podcast. And today we're talking about the COVID-19 pandemic that we've all been living through for the last 11 months. And particularly, we're talking with members of the Mohawk Council Kahnawake Public Relations Department. And they've been integral in helping the task force keep the community informed, with daily, at the beginning of the pandemic, with daily updates on Facebook Live and through other means. And, today I think we're going to talk about the challenges that go with trying to do this monumental task of keeping the community informed. So with that, I'll introduce everybody who we're with, or let them introduce themselves. We'll start with MCK Interim Public Relations Manager, Justus Polson-Lahache.
Hey, good to be here, Greg. So I sit on the MCK Public Relations Team as a member of the Task Force for Communications. We've been there since the beginning, and we've pretty much prioritized a lot of the service that we provide for informing the community. And that's our involvement right here. We have a pretty big team that we work with, and one member is here today, Joe, and the other former member, Neil, is also here to join us. I'll pass it off to Joe.
All right, yeah, Joe Delaronde. I'm the technically the political press attaché. Do a lot of political work, but in the COVID era, we have, of course, given 90% of our efforts in the department to COVID. So that's where we're at. My role has been one of the faces of the task force broadcasts. So it's been a real challenge, but it's also been very rewarding. We can talk about some of that as we go along.
And I'm Neil McComber. I used to work with these guys in public relations and be the actual director of public relations at the MCK. I've since moved to Delaronde in November. However, I was there in March. Actually, I wasn't there. I was returning home from a vacation, and I had to isolate for 2 weeks. So I came here to lend a helping hand, and also I kind of wanted to compare it to the ice storm, because Joe and I were actually on the ice storm way back then. So I thought that would be interesting. Yeah.
If we all rewind back to March 13th, 2020, was Friday the 13th. The front page of Yuriwase on the 12th was 6 active cases of COVID-19 in the province of Quebec. There was an emergency closure of the schools in the community. Then we get a phone call, an email saying that there's going to be a press conference at the at the PK station to discuss specifically COVID-19. We get there, and that was really the very first community update on COVID-19. That was even before there was officially a task force. Joe?
Yeah, it all happened so quickly because I recall those days very well. On March 11th, I believe was a Wednesday, there was a 100th birthday party for Doris Montour at the Cattery Memorial Hospital Center. If her birthday was one day after that, there would have been no party, because at that point, you had the emergency people, the Cattery Hospital, and all of those people got together and had that emergency meeting and immediately decided that we're gonna close things down. Things happened so quickly, and I think that's the thing that still boggles my mind. And over the course of these past 11 months now, I think the first several months, every day was a new day, and it was we've gotten used to it now. But those first couple of months were really, really incredible. And I know for Neil, it was a real challenge because he came back and couldn't really participate in what our team was doing. And he had a difficult time because he felt disconnected. And at that time, we were still able to work physically together as a team. Now we've gotten used to working in the remote fashion, but it was different then. I think the whole world has learned to work in a different fashion.
Yeah, and you look back at that time, and then how quickly the task force was mobilized, and then how quickly the MCK Communications Department was basically given the task from the task force to help provide updates to the community, and then going with daily live updates. Can Justus, can you talk about some of the challenges in getting that and pulling that off, technically and logistically?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at the beginning of how everything hit us, I mean, you look at the day we did the first press conference, right? And we were just very reactive to the situation that we were in at that time. And we didn't have the same information that we have now. We're sitting here, but we're all distanced, and we had our mask, we sanitize everything. It's become a normal habit of how we have to work every day. And, you look back to that first press conference, and we were all standing in a group, and we were, we were next, we were shoulder to shoulder, and we didn't know. We really didn't have any idea of, some of the way the virus transmits itself to people. And we were tasked with, okay, well, let's get the information out. And we were still getting the information ourselves at the time. So there was a lot of challenges in trying to, set up a way that we can communicate, but still work together as a team. But also with new information and new measures that come in, have to adapt a lot of those things. So, we work out of the Emergency Operations Center, and we have been there since the beginning of March of last year. But it's went through a lot of changes. We've went from having, a bunch of people in the room and then putting limits on it, and then, all having to respect these measures that are in place to make sure people are safe, right? And it kind of grew from there. It was one of those things. It was thrown at us, and we had to adapt, and we had to learn, and we had to keep developing the way the program was. So in the beginning, we went live. One of the first broadcasts, it was a cell phone. We had a cell phone and a microphone. And from there we said, okay, well, if this is something that we're going to be doing regularly, let's start putting together a better system for it. And we started looking at different ways. And this is where the PR team, they sat down, they brainstormed different ways that they could try and up some of the quality and make sure, like, you're going live, you want to make sure that, things are in place and it doesn't go off air. And as people watch, we've been off a few times. There were times when we were in a mid-interview and, we ran out of batteries. The microphones died. So there's little challenges like that help you grow and develop the way you run your programs and some of the communications. And we're just talking about the broadcast itself, but it's all the learning steps along the way that we use to get where we are today.
I mean, and at the beginning too, the task force was going on every day live to give the newest information, and that had to be a challenge in itself.
It was. I mean, I think we didn't really have a good measurement in place to gauge, how well the community was informed. And at the time, there was no system in place for people to be able to call and find out information. So this broadcast was really one of the main tools that we used to inform people. And early on in the pandemic, if you recall, information changed like hourly. So there was a need for us to go on almost every single day. And I think we continued that right up until, I think it was around June. And we decided to sort of cut back to, I believe it was twice a week or 3 times a week. And we've been on that schedule since, because now, the information changing has slowed down a little bit, but there's always new information, but it allows us to prepare a little bit more for our broadcasts.
Yeah, and Neil brought up the ice storm, and I think that's an important part of the community's history, because it was the ice storm and the aftermath that created the Kahnawake Emergency Preparedness Law, which the task force is operating under today. So Neil, can you talk about some of the experiences from 1998 to today?
Sure. And I mean, ironically, I was part of the communications for the what you call a task force. It wasn't really a task force, but the emergency operations center back then was at the fire brigade, and it was working round the clock. So Melanie Gilbert was actually the communications officer, and I actually wasn't at the time. I was working on economic development back then.
Wow, and you've come back home.
Full circle.
Joined the next crisis. So I think that's what's interesting is that I got pulled into it after maybe the second day of the ice storm. And here, when this happened, I was away in Florida with my family. Our flight came in midnight or in the morning of the 13th, actually, the Friday the 13th. These guys called me right away. We had a meeting. I was on the phone. But what's important is there were plans in place. The emergency planning did a lot of advanced work in case of these things. The Emergency Operations Center back many years ago was defined that the PK Station Community Room would be the best place for it. We established that Jean Daibo was going to be the task force communications officer, so that was established. And the rationale there was that, when it comes to an emergency, the EOC, the task force, whatever you want to define it, they're in charge. And you need a communications person who's just going to do what they need. So my job at the time was to make sure that they had the resources. So how many resources can we give to them? In this case, everybody. But back then we had, again, Melanie Gilbert was the only person. I came on, there were only two of us. We used to work 12-hour shifts every day, 7 days a week. And then we would have meetings twice a day, do a briefing. Lindsay LeBourne was the spokesperson at the time. The only way to get information out to the community at the time was the radio. Nothing else. Everything else was shut down. I mean, you had an ice storm, power outages. And he used to summarize everything on the radio really well. He did he did a great job. And Joe Delaronde was actually on the radio, giving information to the community. So it's a lot different, in terms of like, okay, the ice storm was 3 weeks. This was 3 years, it feels like. This is, the information's constant. There's many ways to get information out. Back then, there was only one way. So many differences, but in a way, I guess the one thing is that the entire community came together. That's the key. They came together. There was a plan, and I think because there was some planning, because the organizations worked together, I think that's what really helped get things moving. And the community, most importantly, staying tuned to the information and willing to respect some of the decisions. Not always, not everybody, but I mean, for the most part.
And Joe, so you've been for the most part the face of the task force on the daily updates. I think you've been on more shows than anybody else. You were the voice of K103 back in 1998 during the ice storm. So can you talk about, I guess, some of the experiences that you have then and now?
I think the thing that comes to mind right away is that 1998, for some of us, wasn't that long ago. But we have a young population. We have so many young people. And when you think that it was 22 years ago, so many of our people in this community don't even have any recollection of the ice storm. They have no idea what it was like to have no power. See, this we've had power, but we've had other things shut down on us. Also, like Neil said, K1037 was the only outlet at the time, so people were glued to that thing, and it was a real challenge. One of the things that always comes to mind is going in at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was in January, and it was a cold January, and the only way to get started was to start up the little, we had a little generator, and it was just a small one. And public works guys would make sure that thing was filled up every day, and they'd have to come by a couple of times because we broadcast from 6 a.m. till midnight. We did 3 shifts of 2 people each. I did the morning, and like Neil said, it was very effective because they had the information coming to us. And Lindsay LeBourne would stop in sometimes twice a morning with new information. And then he'd also drop in later on the other programs. So the information was always there. And I remember some of the stuff too. It wasn't always the big things. It was, by the way, there's a a load of wood that just came in. So if anybody needs wood, they'd have that go to the council office. They're expecting it at 2:00. So if you really need wood, and only take what you need, and these kind of messages were out there on an ongoing basis, and it was a challenge. And we have to remember too, it was different because some people had no heat, and there weren't enough generators to go around, and so some people were living at the Knights of Columbus. You know, they got blankets and stuff like that. So it was a different challenge. Today's challenge, of course, is different. And back then, like I said, only K103. Today's population has so many outlets. So in some ways, we have to be very, very proactive to make sure that we're getting correct information out there, because so many people have misinformation and they like to spread it. And so the challenge is like provide a consistent forum and platform so that people can depend on the information that's coming out. And that's, I think, the task force's biggest challenge and biggest success.
So yeah, and I think that's really the challenge that as media people that we all face, right? Because there's so much information out there and so much misinformation out there, and being able to sift through everything and be able to provide, whether it be our listeners, our viewers, or our readers, with the best possible information that's going to help them.
Yeah, and one of the biggest differences Joe's alluding to from then to now is back then he's right. We would provide information. The firewood, I remember that when that was my clearest example. People from Onondaga or whoever, hey, we got a load of firewood we're sending to you, got a truck going, and then we put it together. Lindsay goes on the radio, he announces it, etc. So the information was all packaged before, and Lindsay would go on and deliver it to the community. Today it's different. The task force gets information last minute, right up until the updates sometimes, and they're announcing it for the first time to the community. Then there's like a communique or a press release the next day or 2 days later, or there's information on the website, etc. But it's usually, not all the time, but it's usually announced first on live. So that's one big difference from back then.
Yeah, and again, we talk about how the information is constantly changing. For example, earlier this week was announced that there was 0 active cases of COVID-19 in the community, and that's our lead headline in this week's issue of Yuriwase. And as of this morning, there's 1 active case. So the information is constantly changing, and it's a challenge to try to stay ahead of it. Justus?
Yeah, I think the other challenge with the information as well is that Kahnawake has a different situation in this pandemic than Quebec, right? So a lot of the directives and the measures, decisions that are made to make sure that our community is safe don't necessarily follow the same measures and directives that are put on people on the outside. So the challenge with information is you're constantly almost fighting, some of the information that's on the outside, because most times they kind of coexist, or they kind of get along, the directives that are out there, but other times they don't. So the people, like Joe had said, there's more outlets now for people to share their opinions and other information. And that's where the challenge is with misinformation is being able to combat that with our information, which really is geared just for Kahnawake. And a lot of times, what we see is a lot of information coming in from the outside that doesn't necessarily reflect the situation here in Kahnawake. And it makes it hard to put out good information, because people are conflicted when they read media from the outside, or they read, some of the things that Quebec is doing and the justifications of why they do things there. And then here in Kahnawake, we do it differently. So it's a challenge,
Yeah, and of course, the internet has made the world much smaller, and people can get news literally from anywhere in the world. And people have been sharing articles that are talking about the reality for wherever that article is from. It could be Florida, it could be Australia, and then thinking that, well, because it's happening over there, then that's how it should be happening here. When in reality, it's a completely different situation and scenario. I think what people need to realize too is that, living in Kahnawake, we're right next door to the highest hit regions in Canada with COVID-19, in the province that has the most cases in the country. So, so it's a really big difference between, here and in other communities, even just within the Confederacy. Joe?
You make such a good point, because I clearly recall as Quebec's, the long-term care facilities had their emergencies, and the what was it called, right, in Dorval, that had
The Heron.
The Heron. We were doing broadcasts where we were so far at 0 cases, but I said literally from where we sat doing the broadcasts of the COVID-19 Task Force updates, you could see Dorval right over there. It's right there, and they're having 30, 40, 50 people dying, and that's how close it was. And it made you realize that as close as we are, we still could be so separated and so far away. And that's been I think the big success is people have bought in. I think the community has bought in for the most part about the realization that we really have a challenge on our hands to try and keep this virus out. And there were some, and there still will be always people who disagree with some of the directives, but there's no disputing the fact that we've been successful with no deaths, no hospitalizations. There have been people who've had the virus, and it's very a very difficult thing. But we have managed to keep the worst of it away, and we've been both, I think, lucky, but also we have, as a community, really come together to ensure we all follow the directives. And the challenge has been to make sure the logic behind the directives is clear, so people aren't just saying, well, they made that up and I think I'll follow it, but I don't know. We have on the task force, Dr. Gauthier is actually a virologist. Before she became a doctor, her business was virus. She studied that. And so she's an expert. She has been on numerous broadcasts, not only here, but in Canada, and talking about her expertise in what this is. And even some of her opinions changed over the course of this, because as people started to understand the virus, then the ways of taking precautions have changed as well.
Yeah, and if you just look back to the things and how we were operating, March, April, May, June to today, it's a world difference. Neil?
Yeah, and touching on what Joe was just talking about, behind the scenes, people don't get to see, obviously, behind the scenes. That's what the show is about, I guess. And one of the big things behind the scenes is there's hundreds of stories of individuals from this community going above and beyond, and not just from this community. Dr. Gauthier, he mentioned, she goes above and beyond. I don't think people realize how much this woman works, and it's just round the clock, and it's just for the health and safety of our community. I mean, just one example, we needed information about mask wearing when masks were coming out, and she wasn't available. She just wasn't available, and she's like, you know what? I'll have my daughter film me at home, and you guys edit it. I'll send you some footage, and we actually made a nice little video out of it from her, and she went out of her way to do that. Things like that. The show, Justus talked about how it was on a cell phone at first. One at Dio was like me. He was away and he had to isolate for 2 weeks, so he wasn't able to take part at the beginning. And he's sitting there watching us broadcast on a cell phone, and he's like, he has this equipment available, and he couldn't wait to get back in 2 weeks to try his equipment, because he had the proper equipment for live broadcasts. And he waited. Once his 2 weeks were up, he brought it in. He tested it. It worked. Okay, guys, let's use this. Okay, and it was an instant upgrade. And what you see today is that equipment. I mean, he didn't have to do that. That's going above and beyond. I mean, and there's so many stories like that. I could mention so many different people. I just wanted to give a few examples, but that's what these crises do. Our community comes together, people go above and beyond, and even moving today with Dunizakta, I see the same thing. I see people dedicated to getting the businesses back going, to keeping them afloat. I see people working to get individuals training, to get a career, to get jobs, because that's all suffering. So you see the same thing throughout the community.
Yeah, and again, the idea behind our discussion today is to talk about the things that happen behind the scenes that people don't know about. And in the daily task force updates and now twice a week updates, there's a lot of work I think that people don't realize that goes into it.
There's still hair that gets pulled out every day, I tell you.
And I mean, for you guys, the work that you do, just go through. I mean, like how what does it take to get the show on? Because people are tuning in on Facebook Live. Whenever they get the notification, people don't realize what's required to get that done, right? So, Justus, if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's two parts to it. The first part is the information, right? The announcement of whatever is the information is for that particular broadcast has to be discussed. And a lot of times, Neil mentioned it before, it doesn't get finalized until minutes before the broadcast. And it's also a reason why, we try to broadcast at exactly 4:00, and sometimes we go on air at 5. The information has to be finalized, and it has to be sort of panned out and discussed a little bit to make sure it's clear, because that's important to be able to relay that message clearly to the community. Because if we're relaying information that is confusing or doesn't make sense, then it causes a lot more problems than it does when we're trying to inform properly. So that's the first part of it, is the information. The second part is more of the technical side of it. So we have a huge team that, we have Joe. Now we have David Lahache, who also does hosting as well. And then we have our cameraman, and we have the board operator, which controls the equipment for the live broadcast. We also have another person on site to be able to relay between. So if there's things that happen, maybe a presenter says, wrong information or forgot to say something else, then we can say, okay, here, go to the host and say, hey, maybe you can mention this or bring this up. And then the other people that are in the room are the guests. So you're also dealing with scheduling and making sure people are there on time, and, that they show up, they're prepared. Sometimes people aren't prepared because, their jobs keep them from being able to spend that, 10, 15, 20 minutes prepping their presentation before they get there. And a lot of that really depends on having people there on time and their information ready to go. So I think, it's from, if I could put it into time, if we go to air at a 4:00 broadcast, there's already people there working before 3 to prepare for it. And that happens, gradually. So there's one person that starts prepping the technical side of things, and then there's other people involved. They're doing last minute scheduling and confirming, okay, when are you going to be here? And then we determine lineups and how we're going to present the information. So there's a lot of prep work that takes place for every show. And this is like moments before a show goes to air. There's also the scheduling aspect of it that happens before that. So looking at, okay, well, some of the information that comes out of a task force meeting, what are we presenting for the next show? Okay, how are we going to present it? Who are we going to have on the show to present it? Let's confirm schedules. This person can't make it, so let's have this person do it instead. So that's why you see a lot of times it looks like the Lloyd and Lisa show, right? Because sometimes the scheduling just isn't there, So Lloyd and Lisa, as the chairs of the task force, have that responsibility to be on the show to inform the community. So there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes, and then post-production it's making sure we distribute the show properly. So, the live version goes live. There's not much that really needs to be done in terms of that, but we also put it on cable and we send it out on YouTube, and then we send our notifications by email. And so there's a lot of preparation after the show that has to take place as well.
Yeah, Joe?
And we also have to keep in mind that the way people view it or listen to it, because it's also broadcast on K1037, we always try to keep it to about 15 or 20 minutes, but it almost never does, and it's really difficult to schedule because sometimes you have guests that have been scheduled and the topic is important, and a lot of them have to do with mental health and things like that, and how do you access services to take care of yourself or just have someone hear you out, and then all of a sudden it's a big day and there's 5 announcements that have to go out, and then you kind of have to push them off to the side or keep them on, and it becomes a half-hour program, which for us I think is probably too long, but it's something that has to be dealt with. One of the things that has been changed that's going to be happening starting next week is on Wednesday we're going to try and schedule a lot of the issues that are less timely and still are important, but don't need to be there on a certain day, and we'll have an extra program. So that's one of the ways we're looking at working it out.
Yeah, and just to touch what Joe was talking about and Justus, it's interesting because I moved to Delaronde. I switched, and when I was part of the PR team, I would be well aware of everything that was going on. I mean, often Lisa and Lloyd would go on the show and give new information that we weren't even aware of, the public relations team at the time. And then we have to do the follow-up. Like they'll sometimes go on Friday and I guess we're working the weekend, guys. And being at Dewa, it's completely different. I'm now more like one of the community members where I have to go out and find the information. So, I've joined their mailing list. So, I may not always see it live, but I like to get it I see it on the email, it pops up, they send it out right after the show, and I click that and I watch it actually on YouTube now more often. Whereas before, when you're in part of the team, I guess you're watching live, or you're there, or you're hosting, or you want to watch it live, etc., or listen on the radio, whatever. But it's different. It's a completely different change, and I think as although we have an association at Delaronde, I still feel out of the loop now a little bit, and I have to find that information. So it's good to have many avenues to access it.
Yeah. So I guess as we continue to go through, live through this pandemic. Talking to Lloyd earlier this week, saying that now he's talking in terms of light at the end of the tunnel, in a matter of weeks rather than months and whatever. How do we see from this aspect, moving forward?
Yeah, I think the light at the end of the tunnel. I think he was talking at first in the first few months about the tunnel in town, and now we're talking about maybe the LaFontaine tunnel or something like that. Maybe the tunnel just got longer.
Yeah,
but there's still light at the end of the tunnel. It's just that it's a longer tunnel. That's all.
You saved up for that one, I do. I just wanted to mention too something that is interesting because I come from radio and everything is live. So you get used to doing live. There's no pressure for me to go on live, but so many of the guests, it's a challenge that, I don't, we have people in the emergency operations center who work every day and I'm not going to go on. Okay, you can tape me and I'll, show it later. So many people are afraid of that. So my hat's off to anybody who shows up to give their information live, because there's no second take when you're live. Oh, erase that. I'll just do another take. No. What you say is, and there's pressure to that. So anybody who participates and gives information, and that's what Justus was saying. There's a lot of meetings beforehand to make sure that you give the right information, because it's hard to take it back. I know I have made mistakes as the host on several occasions, and I get that note, oh yeah, I gave the wrong date. Oh yeah, I mentioned that the number is this and the phone number is actually that. And that's why we have a team there, so we can all help each other. But it is important to make sure you get it right the first time. And for people who are presenting for the first time, hats off to them too.
I think we've had a really good discussion. If any closing thoughts, on this topic, Justus?
Well, I just wanted to go back to what you were asking about, the light at the end of the tunnel. I think that, once this whole pandemic sort of simmers down a little bit and we sort of go back into somewhat of a normal life, I think, our job as the public relations team for the task force will start coming to an end slowly, but there's also going to be a lot more work that has to be done in terms of, the information that we need to make available post pandemic because of all the effects that happen to people, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual effects that people are experiencing right now. Those are long-term effects that are going to impact families and relationships. And I think that although the light is there, I think there's still a lot of work that would have to be done after the pandemic sort of simmers down.
Yeah, because we're living through unprecedented times, as we always hear. But that's true because we're not able to see our family and our friends and work in the way we're used to. We're not, for those of us who have lost family and friends through this pandemic, we're not able to grieve the same way. We're not able to deal with a lot of things and process a lot of things the same way. So yeah, even though the medical part of the pandemic, is the answer, the key to getting out of it is the vaccine, which is almost here. But the other parts, right? That's where there's going to be a lot of work for the next while. Joe?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned what you just did because, in my final thoughts, I was going to mention that exactly what you said. I hope that the broadcasts have brought comfort and reassurance to people on a daily basis. That's why I mentioned early on the consistency of the messaging. People crave consistency. You can depend on the task force to give information. They don't say, well, we're skipping out this week because 3 people are on vacation. It happens when it's supposed to happen. Sometimes there are extra programs when it needs to be out there. And people need that. And I think that's what I'm most proud of being part of the whole operation is the consistency to give people that reassurance and comfort.
Yeah. Also, I think to add to what Joe's talking about is people to allow them to trust the source of the information. And I think it needs to be said that, the information that's presented to the community is prepared. There's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes to make sure that those messages and that information is clear and important. Neil had talked about Dr. Gauthier. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of experts that work with the task force that cover several different areas that really direct how these messages are made when they go onto the briefing or, any press releases or information we post on social media or on cable. There's a lot of work that goes behind it. So sometimes when you're on the other side of it where, as Neil had said, he has to click the link to check out the info and all of that. There are times when it doesn't seem like the information is coming out fast enough. And it's for that reason. People are working, they're constantly researching, and they're making sure that they have the proper information to be able to present.
All right, Neil?
Yeah, so my thoughts are with, at this time and in closing, are with those who lost their jobs, as well as the businesses who are suffering. So for those who lost their jobs and maybe there's not hope, or maybe they not sure if they have hope of returning to their jobs, we would urge them to contact Ewadunizakta, look for training in new careers if that's what's necessary. For those who the business is suffering, I think the entire community can step up and shop locally. I mean, there's no better time than to shop Kahnawake than now. Just think twice when you need something. You know, could I get it here? When you're going to eat out for supper, why not look in town first as the first option of where you want to eat, or when you're going to go to lunch? I think they really need it right now, the business community. And lastly, now that I'm not part of communications, public relations, I'm basically a community member. I just would urge other community members to stay informed. Keep yourself informed. Make the effort.
All right, Justus?
Yeah, just one last final thought. Neil actually triggered something for me. Just to let people know too that they can always ask questions. You know, we have these forums available. There's a phone number you can call public safety. It's 450-632-0635. There's an email address, questions@mck.ca, and then there's the Kahnawake 911 Facebook Messenger. We get a lot of messages, a lot of like every day. There's a lot of phone calls that come in. Not so much on the email, but I urge people, you know, if they have a question, just reach out to us and contact us.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is Greg Horn, and you were listening to the Your Day Was a podcast. If you have any comments or questions or anything you would like to hear in the future, please do so by leaving it in the comments below. Thanks. On up.